Okay, so good afternoon. Thank you for having me talk through this webinar. I think it's a really good opportunity. My name is Mahnoor and I am delighted to be here today. I'm going to try and share my experience and insights on preparing for the endpoint assessment as part of the Laboratory 6 Scientist Apprenticeship Programme. So I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Mahnoor. I work in the target validation and tractability team at UCB, where essentially I contribute to projects focusing on advancing our understanding of biology and in the very early stages of drug discovery and development. I recently completed an applied bioscience degree with the University of Kent, undertaken as part of a degree apprenticeship programme. And my role at UCB has allowed me to develop a range of technical skills, particularly in cellular and molecular biology. And I'm also engaged with cross-disciplinary teams and business-oriented objectives. And I think that overall has really helped me to not only complete the degree, to get a better understanding of the pharmaceutical industry, because I started with absolutely zero scientific background. I finished my A-levels almost 8 years ago, or 8 years before I started the apprenticeship. And so those 5 years have been absolutely instrumental in where I am today. So I completed my degree and I've secured a position at UCB. So I look forward to hopefully learning more throughout the next couple of years. So I thought it would be really useful to kind of share some of the strategies and insights from my endpoint assessment. I'm going to try and keep the presentation short, hopefully that allows time for questions and an engagement and some sort of discussion, because I think that would be really useful. And I know I would have found that really useful when I was pursuing the EPA. So the EPA is a milestone in the apprenticeship, and it's designed to assess competence and understanding comprehensively over, in my case, the 5 years, or depending on whether you're doing, for example, level 5, that would have been the 3 years that you've spent in your workplace. There was 3 main kind of components of the EPA, and that was the Workplace Synoptic Project, which is written in the form of a journal article, and it summarises the final workplace project that you complete. There is a assessment on the presentation and a discussion following that presentation with your assessor, and there is also a vocational competence interview. I'm obviously happy to answer questions on any of those 3 components, but I wanted to take today to focus on the presentation, its structure, as I found this was a key component and required a blend of technical and communication skills, and sort of really shows what you've learned over the last, 4 to 5 years that you're in the apprenticeship, at least in my case. So I don't have very busy slides. I'm kind of just hoping that I can guide you to the way I crafted my presentation and how I prepared for it. So I aimed for a clear and concise, impactful narrative on my project. I'm not going to go into too much detail of the project because of IP reasons, but I will share with you how I approached it. So essentially, I broke down the EPA into different sections. There was 5 sections in total, and they're kind of on the slide. So the introduction, the methods, conclusions, and then probably the most important part, which was the recommendations, future directions, and business impact of the project. So the way I kind of thought about this was I'd just written up a thesis which was almost 30-40 pages long, and in order to present all of that would have taken a couple of hours. And so I kind of went in with the mindset that key information would be presented, critical data would be presented, and essentially there would be an emphasis on the impact that project has had. So my introduction slides were quite brief. I shared the scientific background of the project, kind of the biology that would be important in order to understand the rest of my presentation. So kind of just a very concise but clear scientific approach to how that project came about. And this kind of fell in really well with the project aims and the hypothesis and the background. And so After I discussed my scientific background, I went into talking about the hypothesis, the aims, and how the project aligned with the organizational goals. I think that was really important to emphasize the business justification of the project really early on. I felt that that demonstrated the relevance and value to the company, which might be an overstatement, but I think it's really important to show how impactful your project is. Um, in those slides, I also highlighted the timeline and the key stakeholders that were involved because that was one thing I kept going back to, especially when later on in the discussion, when impact is discussed, it's easier to then talk about the stakeholders and the business impact if you've discussed this quite early on. I made my aims really clear and ensured that they were aligning with both the scientific and the business priorities, and this was central to setting the stage for the rest of the presentation. From that, I went on to discussing my methods section, and this was a very basic single slide overview. I avoided overwhelming the assessor, or if you imagine that's an audience, with lots of technical details, but instead focused on the overarching approach and the key techniques that I used in order to complete my project and complete my research. I obviously had backup slides to back anything that was asked, and I'll talk about this more later on. And then this kind of fell in really nicely to discussing the results. And I think I forgot to mention, but the way I sort of crafted this presentation was based on the sections I included in the thesis early on when I was doing it as part of the university module. So that was really kind of key into kind of allowing me to talk through things smoothly and make sure that the whole presentation flowed really well. Coming on to the results section, I only presented the most significant findings, and these were carefully chosen that illustrated the success of the project and made sure that I could align these with the aims that I discussed early on. My thesis had a wealth of data. There was so many different assays I had used, but I deliberately curated this section to maintain clarity and focus, and so the overarching objective of my project could be discussed. And then I talked about the conclusions. I brought the narrative a full circle by revisiting the original aims and stating whether each of those had been achieved. So the way I did this was the aims that I had presented early on, I kind of reiterated those and said whether they'd been achieved, and if they had, a key piece of data that showed that, and this tied the story together of the project in a cohesive and reinforced way. And then finally, and probably most importantly, as I've probably said 5 times already at this point, a section that I included, and I think this was key to get the higher marks, was a section on the recommendations, future directions, and business impact of the project. I emphasized the real world value of the project to the workplace. So I talked about the implications for my company, whether this work could be pursued further, what kind of assays could be completed to further the research, its potential to drive innovation, and basically just really hone down on the success of the project and how this demonstrated alignment with the broader organization overall. That's not to say that the project has to be successful, quote unquote, but more so, even negative data to some extent shows you whether your hypothesis is true, and it's worth researching. And then I kind of just want to emphasize on a few key takeaways and some of the things that I wish I had learned early on, and that's literally just to practice. Understand and rehearse your presentation, read through your thesis before your EPA, garner any kind of feedback that you've received. So the way I did this was presenting to my team and my colleagues and my mentors, and I refined that my delivery was good, that I gained feedback, things that were important to discuss, things that weren't important to discuss. I prepared for questions, so we kind of anticipated questions that could arise, and include backup slides to address those potential inquiries. So I'll give you a key example. Controls that are included in some of the assays that I performed were thought about quite extensively. So I tested a range of different controls. I had explained in my thesis why they were good, why they were not, why they were worth pursuing as positive and negative controls. And so when I was asked this question, I had backup slides with data to answer the question and evidence-based answers to kind of give a complete message. Another key takeaway is to keep the content streamlined and just ensure clarity and relevance, aligning with the core objectives and organizational priorities. I think that really helps, especially. I don't think the point of the EPA, or at least not for me, the point of the EPA wasn't to share every assay I'd completed, everything that gone wrong, everything that gone right. It was more so to be clear with the core objectives. And then finally, I'll say this many times, but beyond the science, showcasing the practical and strategic value of the project is essential. So even in the discussion, when asked questions, I addressed the question, I backed that up with evidence, and then I finished the question off with, this is important because this has this impact, or this was important because this could be further used for aligning with the company's priorities. And then, yeah, I just hope that leaves us time for questions. And I think a discussion is probably going to be more useful than me talking to you about things that you have probably heard a million times before.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mahnoor. Obviously, I know from the registration form that lots of students are sort of laboratory 6 students as well. They are probably reaching that point of EPA. So please, if you have any questions, just raise your hand, and then you've got Mahnoor here, so she can ask you any question. She can answer any question that you may have before you come to EPA. If you want to put the question in the chat, that's absolutely fine as well. But again, it's a nice opportunity. Anyone?
Yes, I have a question. My name is Ron, and my students are going into an EPA, and to me, it seems like a really big sea of information that they accumulate, and a lot of information that as a course assessor, I dump in their faces. So when it comes to to being to attending whatever way of assessment, is there kind of like some sort of guidance that will help them kind of feel prepared for it? Because going into any assessment is definitely not an easy experience. So yes, please.
I'm happy to leave this to Blanca and Kirsty and Angela to answer, and Nadia to answer. They probably know a lot more than me. But there was a wealth of resources available in Moodle before the EPA presentation and the vocational competence discussion. So I kind of ran through that information, but I think the most important point for me, and something I'm reiterating to the other apprentices at my company anyway, is that it is not as daunting as you think it is. It's genuinely an assessment of how much you've learned over the time frame that you're at the company. And I think it's easy to forget the amount of information you learn, and it's only when people start questioning you about the company, about your project, and you've kind of got to remember that you're the expert in what you've done. And whilst your assessor will be of a scientific background and they'll have an understanding of what you're presenting, I think just that confidence with your project and knowing the ins and outs of it and practicing with your supervisors is probably the most important thing for me. I genuinely went in thinking, this is going to be so scary. It's almost 4 hours of discussion. I don't know what they're going to ask me. It's going to be like a grilling, but it genuinely felt like a very informal discussion. It wasn't scary. If there were questions that were asked and they weren't clear, they're more than happy for you to ask to reword the question, to say, sorry, I didn't quite understand what you're asking. Are you able to reword the question? And they'll even break down the questions for you if it sounds like a big ask. I think it's quite easily answered. It's genuinely not as daunting as you'd think from looking at the time.
Cassie, thank you very much. I mean, of course, it's always awesome to hear from Kirsty and Blanca, but again, coming from your perspective as a student or as an apprentice, I do say this to the students, but it's nice to get the assurance that that's actually true, because you say it with, we're running this course for the first time. We're doing a level 3 course in as a lab technician, and to hear this coming, from your program, you're at level 6. That's quite assuring. It's about what they've learned. It's about what they know, and I keep telling them, reminding them that you're the experts. I don't know anything. I just teach you, a few bits here and there, but you're the expert. You're the one who knows most about this. You're the one who does this day in and day out. Thank you very much.
The university, you're welcome. The university really prepare you well. I think I probably bugged Kirsty a million times a day to clarify things and made sure that I was answering things correctly. But the workplace project as part of your university degree really prepares you well for the EPA. And there are things that you need to know, parts of the organisation, but I think that's probably something on the students. So the more engaged they are with the overall company, and not just kind of sitting in with this like tunnel vision, I think really helps to, I think if you understand your company well, I don't think the EPA is daunting at all.
Wonderful. Thank you, darling. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Perfect. Any more questions to Mahnoor? I can't see anyone having, oh, maybe there's something in the chat. If we are, okay, maybe I'll read this out. I'm not sure if you can see the chat, Mahnoor. So Tali is saying that this was really helpful. Thank you. And if we were to be doing our EPA in about 2 years from now, I don't suppose there's anything that you emphasize can be done from now and make it less stressful as a whole dissertation than EPA period seems quite crazy.
I'm going to say the same thing over and over again. It feels like I'm probably replaying the tape, but just being as engaged as possible throughout your apprenticeship, making sure that you're attending meetings, making sure that you're understanding the science, making sure that you are well versed in your project. I read so many papers to understand the background of my project that I felt that anything they asked me, I had some kind of understanding for. But I haven't kind of reiterated this as much, but the vocational discussion is based on your competencies, and that kind of list is given to you so early on in the apprenticeship that it's really easy to prepare for. So from the very first day I started accumulating evidence to showcase that I understood the competencies well, and that really helped overall because, when it came to preparing for the EPI, I already had all my evidences, I already had all my background, I already had real world examples, 2 or 3 even for some of them. And so that was less daunting. But yeah, it's not, there isn't anything you can do to prepare the day before that you couldn't do from the very first day you start. I think it's a journey rather than an end point, like this is a test.
Perhaps maybe a portfolio of evidence, maybe having that sort of right from the beginning, from the workplace, it might be useful a little bit, or not sure whether that's a good tip or not.
100% agree.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like, you've been a very engaged student, Mahnoor, on the course, and I think that also was really positive for you in the sense that, you engage really well with university and engage really well with your work. So I think the combination of both has led you to distinction in your EPA and has led you to the first class degree, which you should be very proud of.
Thank you. I honestly couldn't have done it without everyone at the university. I'm so grateful. The support is amazing.
Perfect. Do you have any more questions? Any more sort of tips? Obviously, you're more than free to contact Mahnoor and put more questions in the chat. Sometimes it's just a matter of like, how do I even start thinking about EPA, or what do I have to do? And I think you've given some great tips, Mahnoor, and you said, how the one important bit was that the question that they ask you in the EPA, you might want to reiterate it. So you are able to sort of ask, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question. Do you mean this and that? I think that's probably quite an important tip as well. Just don't feel like you have to freeze when you hear the question you don't quite understand. Just try to ask them for help. That's something that we keep on hearing as well.
They make that really clear when they start the assessment. They specifically say that I'm going to ask you a set of questions. I'll read out the questions first, and then I'll ask you one by one. And if anything doesn't make sense, please feel free to raise your hand and ask us to re-ask the question. So, yeah, not understanding the question isn't
a problem.
And your supervisor or your technical experts present in the presentation component. So not for the vocational discussion, but your supervisor should be present, and they'll be the expert. So if you're still not understanding what the assessor's asking you, they're more than welcome to reword the questions that make sense to you, because obviously they'll know you better than the assessor will know you.